I got to tell you guys about a few new products over at our favorite CBD store. That's, of course, PalomaVerdeCBD.com. The first thing I'm going to tell you about that's brand new over there is these THCV gummies. There's 10 milligrams of THCV per gummy and 10 gummies per jar. A lot of y'all are probably familiar with this THCV. Some people call it diet weed. It's very good for intermittent fasters. THCV helps suppress or dull your appetite, which, of course, a little bit unlike regular THC that, as you probably know, or at least you've heard, can give you the munchies. THCV helps promote energy, unlike regular THC, which, of course, makes you feel kind of mellow. This is legal, oh my God, legal under the Farm Bill. So thank you, Farm Bill. The second thing I want to tell you about that's new over at PalomaVerdeCBD.com is their full spectrum nano CBD soft gels. These have the perfect amount of CBD with THC. 25 milligrams of CBD and 0.27 milligrams of THC per soft gel. Their everyday formula brings your body back to homeostasis and adds this nice extra layer of chill. I like that. I think you do too. A lot of us need that now and again, or maybe every day. Nanotechnology allows better absorption into your body, even better than their other products, which was already amazing. Again, this has a calming effect and it lasts about 6 to 8 hours. And of course, like the other stuff, it's legal under what? The Farm Bill. Thank you, Farm Bill. It's legal. I would not get you guys in trouble. Go over to PalomaVerdeCBD.com. They've got a lot of great products. I talk about them all the time. The massage oil. They've got the sleep bundle. They got nano CBD soft gels, CBD bath bombs, which are amazing. Gummies, tinctures, all of that stuff. Of course, for my French bulldogs, Lux and George, the pet tinctures and the pet gummies. All of these things are over at PalomaVerdeCBD.com. Oh yeah, did I tell you about the cool menthol sports cream? Of course I have before. It's the best sports cream in the world. I get reviews from customers on this all the time. That's the number one thing I like from this company. And they've got all of these great things. Over at PalomaVerdeCBD.com, you will get a promo code because Carlos and Vanessa, the owners, love this show and they want to help out the listeners of this show. Promo code BUCK at checkout gets you 20% off of your order over at PalomaVerdeCBD.com. Promo code BUCK at checkout gets you 20% off of your order. Go give them business and in turn, give me business. Now, let's get back to the show.
You are now listening to the Counterflow Podcast, a place for dissonant voices and unapproved opinions.
You get split in fucking half, but I call him the hologram graph. But I am the center inside the placenta of math. You clash with cyanide gas and die fast. Rhythmical equivalent of solids, liquid and gas. We smash your sinus with the power of Lord Titus. But I am the virus inside of the iris of Cyrus.
Here is your host and humble narrator, Buck Johnson.
What's up, you guys? Welcome back once again. This is the Counterflow Podcast. Great to have you riding with us once again this week, where Father Turbo Qualls is back on the show. He was just on a month ago. This is kind of like a part two, I guess you could say. It's not of the same conversation. It goes a little bit into some different directions than we had last time, but we had so much to talk about last time, and you guys loved that episode as far as comments and reviews and whatnot, messages I got. But when we were done with it, he said to me, we've got to do this again. We need a part two. And you guys messaged me a lot and put comments that you also were anticipating a part two. I didn't make you wait very long, did I? That's just been about a month. So today, Father Turbo Qualls is back on with us, and we're going to talk about powers and principalities because it's very important. There's a lot of nuance and depth to this conversation. And the topic, you shouldn't take lightly, I would say. And I'm not going to take it lightly. That's why I got someone just like Father Turbo Qualls on to talk about this type of thing, powers and principalities. If it sounds like a foreign thing to you or you're not sure where we're going with it, I think you're going to enjoy this conversation and you will kind of understand the depth and the gravity of this after you're done listening to this conversation. Father Turbo Qualls is the priest over at St. Mary of Egypt, Serbian Orthodox Church in Kansas City, Missouri. He's the host of the Royal Path podcast. And of course, if you listened to the last episode with him, you know he's a former longtime professional tattoo artist, and he's just an all-around amazing person. Father Turbo Qualls, welcome back, sir. How are you?
Good to see you, bud. I'm so glad to be here. I've been waiting for this. This is great.
A lot of people have. That's what I was about to say. I've been waiting for it, of course, but this is part two. And it's funny, we went into the first one not knowing there would be two parts, but we got so into the stuff we were talking about. And afterwards, we were both thinking, well, we wanted to talk about the stuff we'll talk about today. So let's do a part two. And then I got all these comments on the YouTube video and people writing me, oh my God, that was amazing. I can't wait for part two. I can't wait for part two. And so they didn't have to wait very long. It's been like a month.
Yeah, it's not bad.
So we'll jump into this. I wanted to talk about a topic that's kind of heavy. And so it's going to take some of your expertise that I know you have and to help us kind of understand some of this. Principalities and powers. Before we jump into like the meat of it, what do you think? I know people come to you and talk to you about this thing. What do you think normal people think when they hear that term? What do you think the average person would say? I know it, or I don't know what principalities and powers are, but I think it means what?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of different camps. One person is going to think, isn't that the mayor and the police? You know, the mayor is kind of making the decisions of how the law should be enacted, or what the ordinances are, or the city council, you know? And then the police are the ones who kind of enforce it, or the fire chief inspector, whatever, you know? And even that's kind of a high level answer, I think, for some people. They would, because as we all know, not everyone is as well versed in how civil governance works, right? That's just something there too. But I think there's another section of people who, typically speaking, they're raised with some level of religious background, Christian background, typically evangelical background, but like a general Christian background. And then they think of, guys with leather wings flying in the sky, whispering into the ears of people to, go steal $1 million or go, invade this country, whatever, and both answers aren't necessarily wrong, but they're both very incomplete. So I think that's how most people would probably answer it,
And just for kind of a ground level basis on maybe where some of this comes from, a famous verse in the Bible, of course, is Ephesians 6:12. And I'll just say that, for we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this world, against spiritual wickedness in high places. When I hear that, and maybe we can see where I'm wrong on this, when I hear that, I picture, against spiritual wickedness in high places, and I think of maybe a president. And then to people that listen to the show, we sometimes understand that there's forces behind the president, and then there's forces behind those people, but we don't know their names. Mm-hmm. And it seems at times like the people who have kind of hold the puppet strings to a lot of these actors on the political stage, maybe they're influenced by some type of dark being or darkness or dark spirit. Is there anything to that interpretation of this?
Yeah, I would say that's a much closer, proper interpretation. And where interpretation is lacking sophistication or nuance, it's important, actually, because sophistication and nuance oftentimes is just, to some degree, sometimes distraction. Mm-hmm. And we see that a lot with certain sectors. Like, certain sectors use sophistication and nuance to actually bury the thing. You'll see that a lot with academia and people typically on the left.
Yep.
Right? That's a distraction. But in this case, it's actually really important, because the nuance that I would give is exactly where you find the joint in the armor to deal with that. Because if you don't, does that analogy work? You want to see the joint in the armor?
Yeah.
If you don't know where that joint in the armor is, then you end up becoming discouraged, because you're just, what you have to bang against the armor of what we're talking about isn't sufficient. So it's not so much the strength of your weapon, but it's the accuracy of your aim that people are missing in this principle, in this kind of law and reality that we're talking about. right? So I would say that like that is correct, but the problem becomes the way that we understand, that kind of dark spirit, that dark being, how that dark spirit, what it is and how it exists, how it, we would say, manifests. And we would also need to really re-examine when we're going up that ladder of like, kind of president or whatever, because it's not just the president, right? And it isn't just the office. It's this question of both.
Yeah.
See, the ticket to understanding this is really moving away from any type of temptation of Hegelian dialectic of one or the other, any type of like you have to have the strength to do the balance, right? And I don't know if we talked about this last time, but I have this analogy I like to use of like who has the best bodies, right? Like the athletes who have the best bodies are gymnasts.
Mm-hmm. Right.
A body, a bodybuilder, quote unquote, is yoked and beefed up and they can lift, but they're not nimble. You know what I mean? They don't have the real stamina, right? A marathon runner, very lean, lanky, right? But there's no strength. They can't lift anything. A gymnast, because of the nature of the work of a gymnast, which is primarily balance, that's the primary work of a gymnast. They have developed muscle groups that people don't even know exist. And gymnasts have such a balanced body of being both lean, but also having a certain measure of mass. And that comes from primarily the work of balance. Are you following my analogy?
Yes.
So in order to have discernment, to know what is true, what is right and what is good, what is right, you need to have like balance. And I'm not talking about balance like the muddy middle. It's not balance for the sake of just not for avoiding conflict. It's quite the opposite, actually. Because if you want to actually be productive in your conflict, you have to have balance. Because falling to one way or the other too much, it's still going to lead. You're going to be in conflict either way. But only the middle road, which I would call the road path, only that provides accuracy, right? Because these situations are so complicated and nuanced intentionally. And so it isn't just the man or the office, it's both, right? So the man in the office, you need to take those both into account. And you also need to understand that dark spirit, quote unquote, that's moving behind the scenes, that it isn't just this kind of like, again, some horned dark figure sitting in a cloud somewhere. Mm-hmm. It's within, right? It's within. So this gets us into, understanding principality and power in a clear sense. Principality being the inward, the spirit of something, and the power being the external. And it's these both. It's these both. And I would say another way to kind of explain this to people, in the ancient Christian understanding, in Orthodox understanding, a human being doesn't have a body and they don't have a soul. That's what they are. Do you see the difference? You don't possess a body, although there's language that uses that, but it's the context is important to understand. You don't possess a body like you do, like, oh, that's my car, right? That's what you are, right? The totality of what we are is body and soul. That's why when someone dies, it's a very unnatural thing for us. Now, this isn't a rabbit trail because you have to understand that the more that you understand what you are, the more that you can begin to understand how the world works. So seeing corruption in your government, seeing corruption in the world around you, all you have to do is look at the corruption within yourself to see how that works.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yes.
And then once you've properly identified some of the way that works, then you can figure out what you're going to do about it. Mm-hmm. Are you going to participate in it or are you going to work against it? But in order to work against it, you have to know what you're working against and how. But it's very easy to participate with it. All you have to do is go back to sleep.
Yeah.
And that's cipher, right? Cipher the matrix. I know this juicy steak isn't there. but I don't care. And that's what a lot of people do. But they will do that in different ways, right? Because one of the things I hope we get into is one of the ways in which a lot of your audience might be tempted to go back to sleep is thinking that the way that they're going to deal with the corruption things that they see is just by hacking away blindly with their battle hammer or their whatever, or just, their AR, and just thinking that that's going to do something. And it's going to deplete you maybe even quicker than a type of apathy will. Right? Because apathy and nihilism is like a slow death, right? But the other side, in regards of a zeal not according to knowledge, right? And to some degree, a fear and anger, those things deplete a man very quickly, right? So again, the bodybuilder versus the marathon runner, the gymnast will have the stamina and the strength, right? And the accuracy is needed. Is that?
Yeah. This is a lot to take in, but I do like the gymnast reference. Though, is that you're looking for the pound for pound strength here. Maybe a way that people can kind of see this in ways that are a little bit more tangible, I suppose, or familiar to us, maybe because of recency bias or something. But let's look at the culture wars, because everyone talks about that. I talk about it on this show. A lot of people think there's a red wave coming in November, which there could be, that's more based on cultural issues, maybe even than finance and economics and things that have led to red waves in the past. How can you explain powers and principalities and powers in terms of the culture war? Can you give any examples that might help the people listening go, okay, I'm starting to see what he's talking about?
Yeah, so it's tough because the best way for me to explain it is from a position of really trying to avoid that trap.
It's the trap I fall into. It's hard.
It's hard. But let me give you an example. So there was an American journalist who was in Berlin, in the early days of like the early days of the rise of Nazism, right? And he wrote this. It's really incredible when you read it. He says, essentially, like it's amazing to be in a country that does not tolerate pornography and filth and this and that. You know what I mean? And he basically says, this is, in fact, if you don't mind, I actually want to pull up. I was just reading it.
Yeah.
I'm gonna, because it's really interesting. He says, he was a delegate to the Baptist World Congress in Berlin in 1934, right? His name was William Lloyd Allen. And he says, it was a great relief to be in a country where salacious sex literature cannot be sold, where putrid motion pictures and gangster films cannot be shown. The new Germany has burned great masses of corrupting books and magazines, along with its bonfires of Jewish and communistic libraries. So there's a lot of people who are hearing that going like, sounds great.
Yeah, right.
That sounds great. But keep in mind what happened just a few years after that. So what I'm trying to get at is that this almost gets us into this dovetail of understanding where moralism can be problematic. What I mean by that is we have a set construct in our minds of what we think is right and wrong, but the measure of why we think it's right or wrong has nothing to do with ultimate reality, which we would say is God, right? Which, as a priest, I'd say is God. It has more to do with my own personal tastes, my own predilections, right? So therefore, it's what we would consider to be an idol. let me walk this back, right? This should be good.
It is.
When I say idol to people, they think of, somebody in Southeast Asia in rags bowing down to a statue. And you're ignorant, you're dumb, you're idle, right? Or they get a picture of Charlton Heston, breaking like this. Okay. So that's not really like the thing. Because if you begin to understand idolatry in its true sense, then this will kind of get us back to what I was talking about with Berlin. Idolatry happens when you take a portion and make it the whole. Let me give you an example.
Okay.
Jimmy loves long blonde hair and a long pair of legs, right? Jimmy meets Carol. Carol has long blonde hair and a long pair of legs. Jimmy ignores everything else about Carol, right? Because all Jimmy can see is the long blonde hair and the long pair of legs. Jimmy marries Carol. 20 years later, Jimmy is on the verge of suicide and divorce because of the long blonde hair and the long pair of legs. The long blonde hair and the long pair of legs was an idol to Jimmy. And instead of seeing Carol as the whole person, right? The fact that she was destructive, all those things, right? He was fixated on that. Are you following me?
Yeah.
That's idolatry. That's the way idolatry works in the modern age now, right? And we can superimpose anything on that. We can superimpose class, race, ideology, all those things on that, right? It's when you look at something to the detriment of the whole picture. Are you following me? This is the way to understand idolatry.
Yes.
So that gets us back to, okay, all those things sound great. That sounds like we're describing our American society right now. Pornography, salacious movies, gangster movies, all that, right?
Yeah.
Well, it tells you we're really primed for something else too, because what came after that?
Yeah.
Right? People got what they wanted. They wanted a clean moral society, right? But the problem was they wanted a clean moral society just for the sake of having a clean moral society, not for God, not for the sake of God, not for the sake of actual love or truth or these things that embody that, right? That really leads someone to be able to have those things without them becoming an idol. Because when they become an idol, what you get is Nazism. See, Nazism has been vilified for the wrong reasons. People don't like Nazism now because people have swallowed in a kind of like neoliberal disgust for like, let's say racism, whatever, okay? Which is, okay, that's bad. Sure, I can say that. No problem, right? But that's not really the problem.
Right.
Because it wasn't that caused the real destructive aspects of Nazism to come out. It was their disgust. They had a disgust. It was this desire for, it was the idolatry of purity in the wrong sense. So this desire for purity leads to all kinds of errors. Even though it's good to have something pure, but you need to know why something needs to be pure, not just for the sake of your own saying, this is what I am because I'm better, right? Puritans, the same thing, right? Now, I'll be the first one to tell you, the devil was in Salem. Don't let anybody fool you, right? The devil was in Salem, but that doesn't mean there wasn't certain errors either. So Salem witch trials have become this kind of like caricature in which people of a religious moral stripe are vilified. They're made demons, right? And this is something the left understands right now, right? This is what they've been doing up until now. But see, what's interesting is, and this is now we're drilling down slowly to why all this matters. These principalities that we're dealing with. Now, remember, the principalities are the inner, the powers the outward, right? But we can even talk about something like a throne, like a spiritual power that's above these things, right? It doesn't care whether someone's all the way to the left or all the way to the right. Because what the goal is to get people off balance, to get human society off balance. Because when humans are off balance one way or the other, this is the means by which destruction happens. And destruction has its own value. Destruction has its own kind of like spiritual capital, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
And if you don't believe me, you can talk to any combat veteran. They'll tell you, you see some really crazy things happen, and people do crazy things in the midst of war. You can talk to anybody who's been in a bad neighborhood. They'll tell you, or like, we've been in cliques. Like,
yeah,
when there's a riot going on, it's not fun. But there's a power there. There's something there that's bigger than everybody. You know what I'm talking about,
Mm-hmm.
So this move, for instance, getting back down to your original example, this red wave that's coming, it makes sense to everyone because the absurdity, everyone is sick of transgenders and transvestites and, grabbing kids and teaching them in schools. Like, everyone's sick of this, right? I'm sick of it. You're sick of it, right?
Yeah.
It's so bad. It's so bad right now that even like, quote unquote, old queens and, are sick of it.
Yeah.
That's how bad it is, right? But that's how you know something else is coming. That this correction is coming, and people are going to usher it in, and they're going to like, I don't care. Like, I don't care what it's going to take. Just clean this up.
Yeah.
That's the danger.
Mm-hmm.
Because right now, terrible things are happening, and it disgusts us, and it should. But there is a whole nother level of things that can really potentially happen in this overcorrection if people don't watch it. And I think the reason why it's important, why it's so important for me, and especially thank you for this opportunity to speak to your audience about it, is because the people who are watching your show are primarily the people that I'm concerned with. They're the people who have the potential to see it. The masses, for the most part, are so locked in, they don't even know that there's this issue of the extremes, right? But all it takes is for the people who already are kind of, awake to this reality of not falling one way or to the other. This is why I have hope. I said a while ago, like on one of my last podcasts, I was talking about and I want to clarify that because I said, people who are just moving exclusively in a political, think that you're going to change things, like you're not. And I stand by that. You're not. But it's not that I'm saying being apathetic or nihilistic, because I think that what you need to do is you need to find where the joint is. If you're just going at it like they've taught us, get elected, get in there, and through the force of your, what do they call that when you go door to door? Your polling and all that. It's not going to do anything. Because as soon as you get into a place of power, who's to say you're not going to get corrupted either? Because you're not aware of what we're really dealing with. You understand what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. But when people who get it, and people who tend to be libertarian, for instance, kind of get it, because they're disenfranchised and disillusioned with both sides, typically speaking. That's why I'm excited, because if more of us can really understand this principle, and that you aren't just dealing with the material reality of the way that, the wokes have won the laws or the culture war through the means of dominating narratives online through cancel culture, right? Mm-hmm. You don't deal with that by doubling down and having, how do you get a better video? How do you get better messaging? It isn't just having the money to pay for the cool graphics. Because people have done that and it's it falls flat. Why? Because the spirit of the thing isn't in alignment right. Mm. You need to have a spirit that is speaking truth about something, that has its finger on the pulse, but is also articulating it, expressing it, or as we mystics like to say, I guess, quote unquote, manifesting it. It needs to be both lining up, right? That type of accuracy, that's where you start getting groundswells in the right way, right? Because that's what the left has done. The left has caught on to certain things, but then it rides the wave a little bit. That's how it gets this critical mass, but then it doesn't stop because it's gluttonous and it keeps going. And what I mean by that is this: it will allow me to kind of not make that so abstract, right? Mm-hmm. there's certain issues that I'm going to say right now, and I'm going to prove the point, because as soon as I start to mention them, there's going to be viewers that have initial like, I don't want to talk about that, right? But that proves my point, right? It's the mission has been accomplished, right? So like the left picked up on certain things accurately, like issues of race, right? And we talk about race now, it's just like, I don't want to talk about it because like BLM and all that trash, like for sure, right? But the thing that people don't understand is that critical mass happened because they had their finger on something that was there, but they exploit it. It becomes hyperbolic. It becomes more than it is. And it uses that energy to now kind of hoodwink people. And it's the same thing with the right. Like what's going to happen now for people is they're going to be like, I'm sick of tranny, fill in the blank, in the school telling Jimmy to be a tranny with the library book. Yeah, they got their finger on something. But what these principalities do is they get that finger just enough and it puts it on the owl button on someone. Whatever paradigm, left or right. The left did it with actual quote unquote injustices. Now, whether they were big or small, that's not the point. They're usually very small. And they try to make it a universal thing, right?
Yeah, right.
You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
But people make the mistake of overcorrecting and saying, there's nothing there, right?
Yes.
And it's on this other side now where it's like, okay, they're making the frogs gay. Okay. So the thing is like, that's an owie button, but you keep the finger, these principalities, quote unquote, keep the finger on the owie to just get people to the point where like, get your finger off of that. That hurts. But by that time, that kind of critical mass of anger and rage, the ball's already rolling. So yeah, we want to stop, Lola from seducing Timmy in the library with his transgender agenda. But at the same time, people become so caught up in it that they're like, let's slaughter them all, and it doesn't matter. Now,
right.
Now what's being sacrificed is your humanity on the other end.
One of my favorite sponsors is back with us here on Counterflow. That would be Texas Scorecard. Anytime you want to find out anything that's going on in the Texas political scene without a bad propagandized media narrative, just visit Texas Scorecard. They were founded in 2015 by a former Ron Paul congressional press secretary. They're Texas-based, they're Texas-focused counterculture media organization. They've got so many cool things over at Texas Scorecard. Lots of podcasts, videos. Actually, I was a part of that. You can find a video there of me being interviewed in the Texas Scorecard studio. They've got live programming. They've got a print edition. They've got a very popular daily email newsletter highlighting the biggest stories of the day. They've even got a program to help grow the next generation of disruptors, and we like that. Their mission, disrupt statism and reconstitute self-governments. They are pro-citizen. They serve the grassroots against big government through narrative, tools, and information. They do not align with any party. I think that's very important. They work to hold lawmakers on both sides of the aisle accountable. They're a nonprofit. There's no paywalls. You guys aren't going to have to pay for any of this. Their reporting is always free. Find them on all social media channels by searching Texas Scorecard. They're on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, all of that. You can sign up for their free daily newsletter at texasminute.com. That is texasminute.com. Think about this. They support this program for you guys. So just give them a look. Texas Scorecard. Anytime you want to find out the real deal of what's going on in the Texas political scene, Texas Scorecard is your one-stop shop. Let's get back to the show.
Does that, are we?
I mean, yeah, that's what we're witnessing. And I want to ask about something I just thought of. I also have to point out the Lola reference was amazing. That's going to go right over so many people's heads, but that was brilliant. It seems to me that it's human nature, and I know it is within me also. I'm not casting this on everyone but myself, but it's human nature to kind of want this overcorrection because you see these little things, these little examples. And it's funny that you say it starts off with something kind of small on the other side, or the people perpetuating, that's not that big of a deal. They're saying that right now. It's like really show me where the drag shows hurt you or this kind of thing. It's not that big of a thing, but it's human instinct to see these little owie things and your emotion is like, this is awful. I don't care if there's a swing towards the opposite direction. I want these people crushed. I almost feel bad saying that, but that is an instinct I think that's within us. And it seems because of that instinct, we keep seeing this pendulum swing all the way to one way, and then it's going to swing all the way back. Is it just within our nature?
It's within our fallen nature.
There you go. Right.
We were not intended for that. And the way I would kind of pull that apart for people is there is a way out of the cycle. That's the key thing. There's a way out of that pendulum swing cycle. But again, it takes real effort, but it is in our fallen nature to want that, right? And it's in our fallen nature, really. Here's the other portion of that. We're all familiar with this statement, but when you see it in yourself, that's where things change. We don't really want freedom.
Mm-hmm.
We want to be told what to do. It's just a matter of whatever measure you're willing to kind of experience that. People don't want freedom because freedom entails responsibility.
Yeah.
And freedom entails a certain type of terror and danger that we don't like. We want security.
Yeah.
Whatever that is. So the left, and so just for some language, hopefully some language can get going in the circles, right? When I say left, and it overlaps right now, so it works. When I say left, I don't just mean left as in political left, kind of current liberal streams. I also mean left in regards of, I want hookers and crack and, and I enjoy watching people's heads getting bashed in.
Mm-hmm.
That plays to this very kind of like base aspect. That's what the Orthodox Church Fathers would call being tempted from the left. Mm-hmm. It's like I'm tempted with drunkenness, whatever, right? Now, the right, which when I say right, I don't necessarily just mean, conservative right wing, whatever, right? It overlaps now, it does, but it's not like one for one. Also, this side here is temptations to pride and arrogance, right? And a different kind of violence. You see what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. So this is the thing, because we find power in those movements. Listen, we all know about bottled courage, right? People, guy knocks back a fifth. He's like, man, the band's playing just right. Let's get some aggro. Let's do whatever, and you get into it, something takes over.
Yeah.
Right. The music he's been listening to for 15 years, all these things, his frustration with his dad, all these things begin to coalesce in that moment. And he's something else. He's Jim Hawkins, whatever. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah. Another reference that's going to go over people's heads, but yes, yeah. I got that one.
Yeah. But he becomes something else. You follow me?
Yeah.
It goes on the other side, right? That person who's, a principal at a school, or the leader at his Elks Lodge, whatever the thing is, he's seeing all this and that. And he's like, you know what? He finds power in his correctness, in his moral, taking the high road. We saw that in the 80s and the 90s with the religious right. And it's that's why so many of us are disgusted with religion.
Yeah.
Because we saw the Falwell's, they were intoxicated with this kind of religious arrogance, which became its own caricature. Are you following me?
Yeah.
But there's power there. They became something more than it wasn't just Jim Baker, Jerry Falwell. It be something else, a bigger picture. There was a totality there. So this man, I hate to pick on, I named names, whatever, but who cares? What are they going to do? So a Falwell, whatever, this man, he puts his finger on the decadence of the 1980s or whatever. And he begins to kind of speak out about it. And he uses languages not just English, obviously, but certain religious language that, kind of tickles the ears of certain people. He has a certain way of dress. He has a certain way of showing his authority. People begin to buy into it. They take money. That money they earned by participating in a system right? That was built on certain moral constructs anyways, Iran Contra, right? What were we doing in Nicaragua? You see what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
You start pulling apart all these things and how you whether it's our iPhone, whether it's your Playboy, or whether it's the tomatoes that you got in the middle of winter in Nebraska, and you don't get tomatoes in the middle of winter in Nebraska, that had to come from somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
I hate to say it because this feels super crazy, lefty to other people, but all those things are a part of the system.
Yeah.
And they aren't necessarily egalitarian. They aren't necessarily altruistic, right? So what I'm trying to say is when we talk about these principalities and powers, left or right, you can't just simply be like, orange man bad, whatever, all of these like black hat, white hat, cowboy ways of approaching it. That's fine for TV. That's fine for having a couple beers on the porch with the boys and just complaining. But if you really want to do something about it, that's not gonna get you there. You need to understand what we're talking about now to really know what you're fighting against and it's Goliath and David, essentially. You need to have accuracy. That's the only way. And I think this is important to say because you have, again, like we started off in the top of the conversation, you got to see it within yourself first. Where you're like, yeah, I don't care what happens. I just want them crushed.
Yeah.
And you got to ask yourself, is that right? Even if you're not a Christian, let's say, is this really what a human being should do? Right? Ask yourself this, am I right about everything? Now, if you're someone who says, I am right about everything, then I would say to you, you're firmly caught up in that spirit of arrogance. And like, I guarantee I'll find something wrong with you. So then I'll say to you, so now should we have someone come and crush you? This is the way out. This is when when Jesus says, he's without sin, let him cast the first stone. Mm-hmm. That isn't a call to just be a mamby-pamby, don't do anything, mushy middle. That's a call to discernment, right? Because Christ he's a man of war and he's a man of action, but it's righteous war and it's righteous action. And that's what we're talking about is how do I begin to walk a path in which I can discern what is a righteous action? Because it's not necessarily what you think it is. Is that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there's a kind of a line of thinking in my camp, I suppose, where people will say, don't even engage the left within certain arguments or certain debates, because then you've been pulled in already. You're playing by their rules, you're on their battlefield, and you've already lost when you do this. There's no point in trying to effectively bring out the science if you're going to talk about the efficacy of jabs, because once you get into these layers, they've already won because they're not honest actors. They're not doing this in good faith to really have a great scientific discussion. It seems like there's an element to that you're trying to get on here.
Well, I'm glad you brought up that example because that's exactly it. Let me give one more example to dovetail what you're saying. How is it that in communist regimes, like what happened in the Eastern Bloc, right? Why is it that you would have criminals? Criminals became the trustees within the prisons. And honest people who actually were law-abiding, even under those standards, but disagreed with what was happening, they were the ones who were tortured and killed. How do you explain that? Well, it's very easy. Because what we're talking about has nothing to do with obeying the law. Mm-hmm. It's about do you acquiesce to the spirit. See, the criminal who was made a trustee in the prison, yeah, he's in the prison, but he's given power. You can do whatever you want because he acquiesces, he bows to that spirit. He agrees with what's going on with that spirit. It has nothing to do with the minutiae of the law, right? Whereas the person who's the good actor or whatever, they're obeying the law, but they know that this is inherently wrong. And that's why they have to be killed. So the person, that's why giving data to someone about the pokies, it's not going to do anything because it's not about the pokies. Like, if you don't know this now, the pokies, the jabs, it's nothing to do with science. It's a religion.
Yeah.
And that is the offering and the incense to the new God. Like the mask is the cross, right? And the poke and the jab, that's the communion.
Yeah.
That's what it is. And if you don't get that yet, like that's probably why some people still just pull their hair out. I stopped, I'm bald, but like I stopped pulling my hair out a long time ago over that stuff because I saw pretty quickly that, and again, this is the thing. It's this principality and powers thing that we're dealing with. If you don't get that, that's why some people are still frustrated and they think that it's about fighting the wokies. It's about fighting the wokies, man. The wokies are in jail just like you are, right? The only way out of that is understanding like this balance, right? Because acquiescing, this is the key thing, acquiescing to not the logic, what I mean by logic, like of data, but like the rationale.
Mm-hmm.
That's what they want. They don't care about the data. They want you to see like, no, this is what's virtuous and good. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
That's where you need to engage them, right? And that's, if nothing else, it's holding the line and bearing witness to this is false. And that is what needs to be done. But you need to bear witness against something being false in the right area. Don't argue about the scientific efficacy of the jab. You argue about, low-level moral, higher level or deeper level, however you want to look at it, the spirituality of what this is really. What does this mean? And let me kind of unpack that word spirituality a little bit, because I think that's where some people get lost. You know what I mean?
Yes. Yep.
When you talk about like, what's the spirit of America? Like, what does that mean, right? Well, most people, right, would say, truth, justice, and then like the American way kind of like clouds it. But like, there's these things we talk about, liberty, freedom. You know what I mean? When you talk to someone about what the spirit of America is, they don't give you the kind of like details first of I'm free to own an AR-15, right? Or on the other side, America had slavery, and you know what I mean? No one like necessarily leads with that, right? They'll say America's corrupt and unjust, or America's this bastion of freedom. They're describing the spirit of what they think the country is. Are you following me? That's the way for, at least in this context, to understand when I say spirit, right? It's even bigger than a religious construct. Does that make sense? Because we're not talking about religion in this sense. We're talking about a thing. We're talking about a nation, which is a amalgam of people united under a way of being, of action. That way of being, what came first? You giving the $5 to the guy who's hungry, or you being of a mindset that says it is good and right and a human thing to do to give someone? What came first, right? You had to have that mindset or that spirit first. Mindset, not brain patterns, right? When I say mind, don't think of the brain. Think of something deeper, right? The spirit. Your spirit's like, it's right for me to take care of my fellow man, whatever, right? That goes across the board, right? But that's what leads to the action. But the action and the thought or that kind of disposition, they happen at once. That's what someone encounters. When you come up to me and you're like, here you go, man. I can see you're in rags, you're hungry, here's $5, right? I'm encountering the totality of what that is. I'm encountering you acting out your understanding, your experience, your morality, all that spirit. Spirit is the shorthand for that totality. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Because we can spend all day long chopping it up. Well, it's you were raised this way. You're an American. Like, no. What's the spirit of the thing, right? It cuts through, and you begin to really understand what's going on here, right? Forgive me. I just want to say this because I want to use combat analogy.
Yeah.
Right. So there's this cat. His name was Bruce Lee. Maybe you've heard of him, right? And so Bruce Lee developed this thing called Jeet Kune Do. And this is just whatever. I don't want people writing in the comments about, well, actually, just follow me on this analogy, right?
Right.
The whole thing about Jeet Kune Do was that Bruce Lee's philosophy was to reduce what he considered to be superfluous movements.
Yeah.
So like in karate, there was all these very circuitous movements which made combat not as effective as it could be. And the same thing with karate, but on the opposite end, karate was too rigid, right? So Bruce Lee was like, he developed a system which reduced all the superfluous aspects of, like, let's say Kung Fu, but also was flexible enough to be effective in a real life situation as opposed to karate, which was too rigid and stiff. Are you following me?
Yep.
Okay. This is what I mean by learning to get certain language. And this is where I think a lot of people who've been in certain, like in these circles, like libertarian circles, I think this is why a lot of people are catching on to orthodoxy, because they're realizing that there's the need for broader language to articulate what they're experiencing. So a materialist mindset framework isn't enough. It's not enough to explain what happened in 2020.
Yeah.
You can't just say, well, it was the wokies who did this and that, and it's a communist takeover. It's the cultural Marxists. That's not enough. If you do your work, it's not sufficient. You're like, no, there's something else here. I mean, even Naomi Wolf, she's a great example.
Yeah.
She's starting to come to this understanding, right? Something else is happening. So you come to an ancient, quote unquote, institution like orthodoxy or the institution, you go like, oh, you've already had language to describe this. Yeah. It's like Jeet Kune Do. We just call it spirit. Whereas the liberals and the academics are using a million terms to complicate it and to bog it down, right? This is the shorthand. Spirit. That's how you explain the motivating thing behind what you see in the material world. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yes. Can you, just for those, I used to hear that term, material world or materialism, and I would conflate it with something that it's not supposed to mean. Can you explain that really quick for those listening that think you're talking about like a love of stuff?
Yeah. When I say materialism, I'm not talking about I want 1 million Gucci bags and I want 50, bags of whatever. It has nothing to do with a love of stuff, right? It's material in the sense of matter, like physical matter, and the totality of existence is exclusively matter. So it's Pink Floyd. All you ever touch, all you ever taste, all you ever see is all you ever be. It's this understanding that there is no deeper motivating or there is no deeper movements than the material reality. You are a combination of chemical reactions and pheromones, and like that's what moves you. This is what we mean, right? It's a denial of the reality that there are immaterial, which means invisible to our perception, and what seems immaterial to us, intelligences. It's that denial of what we call a spiritual world. That's what we mean by materialist.
Yes. It's very often for people, I hope this analogy makes sense. It's what the pro-choice people very often use.
They're materialists.
They're materialists because it's just a clump of cells. It's just it's their property. It's a clump of cells. That's all there is to it. That's an extremely materialistic way to view a human soul, basically. Man, you just touched upon something that I definitely wanted you to get into. People will, I think, understand powers and principalities if you can use, and however you'd like to, if you can use 2020 and 2021 kind of as another example of some of the things that went down, because during that time is what led me to orthodoxy. Again, I think this happened to a lot of people. You start seeing what's going on, and we had this libertarian framework in our mind, and all of a sudden there seems like there's gaps that aren't filled in just with our political philosophy, a material philosophy. It seems like there's got to be something else at play here. I can't put my finger on what it is. And then boom, for some of us, you discover orthodoxy and it starts to fill in the gaps. For others, they're still stopping short of this for some reason, maybe because I don't know why. There's a litany of reasons, but can you kind of get into some of that too?
Sure. And some of this I might back at you, because some people might be good to hear again part of your journey, because I think that's very instructive. But I think one of the key things is absurdity. There's a level of absurdity that we all began to see And it's really important because everyone's familiar with corruption. Everyone gets that. What we started to see was beyond that. There was a level of absurdity that said something is beyond the pale, right? Which tells you that there's a certain measure of a callous, which this should be a wake-up call to people. Because it's not like all of a sudden this other reality just happened. It was already at play. Yeah. But so many people were just like asleep, and it took this kind of threshold to wake up people. Does that make sense what I'm saying?
Right.
But the absurdity began to be the catalyst by which people were like pulled out of their everyday framework and saying, no, something's wrong here, right? And it really was, and forgive me, this may not be where you're headed, and I want to know where you're headed, but I think for a lot of people, what I saw was, okay, they're acquiescing to the thing. Nobody knows what cocoa is, what the coof, whatever that is. What is it? Okay. So no one wants to be, an idiot or a jerk. So you just kind of follow those streams for a little bit, but then you start realizing, hold on here. Like, I'm doing this thing. Everyone's doing this thing, but it's not really bearing out with what I'm actually like experiencing. And more than that, people's response to this is really bizarre. And why? You know what I mean? And that level of absurdity and that threshold began to we passed a threshold which was acceptable, and it began to be like, okay, something is off, and it's even in the inability to find out what it was. That kind of perpetuated it even more, because you couldn't find, as hard as you searched, you couldn't find a quote unquote rational explanation for why people were losing their minds. This was beyond normies. This was beyond just usual government corruption. There was something beyond that, and it was starting to change people. And that's the thing. A lot of us saw people like, okay, whatever. And then all of a sudden it was like, they turned into like rabid, mostly rabid liberals out of like, what? Right. And then for some people, they saw it the other way. Like, some people turned into just like, goose steppers overnight too. Like what happened? It was the threshold of what I would say is absurdity and the speed in which it happened. Those two things were the catalyst to kind of like awaken. Does that illustrate a little bit what we're talking about? And so the thing is you couldn't find reasons for what was happening, and thus you're hurled into a whole other realm of understanding or searching for some sort of understanding that you weren't used to. And that's where a lot of people started turning to religion or other things, because it's like, all I know is the closest thing I could use, and this like Naomi Wolf, right? The closest thing I can use to describe this is it's evil. And I would never use that before, because I feel like I am now becoming one of those people I've made fun of for the last 20 years. Yeah. But I don't know how else to explain what I am seeing. And that's what happened.
Yes, precisely. That's a good way to put it. And I would hear, and maybe it's because when you start to see things beyond a material world, certain, it's like when you learn a new word, all of a sudden you hear it all of the time. I heard more and more, these people are demonic. You would hear that, like, this is a demon. This has got to be a demon. And you'd even see like photos. Oh, look at the eyes. Can you talk about that? That's something that's still, I don't want to use like prelist to use a term that some people may or may not know, but I don't want to fall into something where I'm saying everything bad's a demon, or this person is demonically possessed, or can you educate us on how this kind of thing works, basically? I mean, that's for lack of a better term.
Sure, this is great. So real quick, that word prelist that you use to give everyone a definition, prelist is a term that's used in the Orthodox tradition to describe someone falling into spiritual delusion. That's what that word means for people who don't know, okay? And so this goes, again, remember the trick, the gymnast. You have to be a gymnast, one way or the other. So materialists think that there's no spirit to anything. Everything is mental illness, or everything is some sort of sociological thing. he's oppressed by whoever, right? What like that's the excuse for everything. But the other side is everything's a devil and everything's in this and that, and beginning to see things in a way that's separate or a caricature, right? This is the problem, because when the devil isn't under every rock, just every other rock, right? So like when you begin to understand that, yes, you may be seeing something, but the way to discern this is, number one, you wrestle not against flesh and blood, as you started off. When you're fighting with your cousin Jenny because she's a full-blown, pro-choice, transgender, like the whole thing, like, it's not your cousin Jenny, right? Because Jenny on her own may have some participation in this, but you gotta understand she's jacked into something bigger. So you gotta start looking for Jenny. You gotta meet Jenny as you knew her as your cousin, and this is where you get your gymnast muscles. You start engaging her on that human level as Jenny, right? And sometimes it takes patience, it takes all these things, but it's like you gotta understand that, like, yeah, what you're seeing, which is foul and nasty, and maybe even like, let's say, dark, and like that's something. When I'm around Jenny and certain things come up, like you can feel it. You know what I'm talking about? It's like, hey, Jenny, pass the potatoes. Great, eating potatoes, everything's good. Then all of a sudden, Uncle Bob, who's had too much vino, he says something about stupid Biden, whatever, blah, 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 whatever. And then all of a sudden, Jenny's like, and then like everything changes. Like, I don't even know if that's Jenny anymore, right? Mm-hmm. That I think everyone understands what I'm talking about, right? And it goes both ways, right? What's overtaken Jenny, right? This is what we're dealing with, right? And it isn't like something came from the sky, entered into your grandma's living room, right, and like started pulling strings. That's not it, right? Which gets us back to the first part of the conversation, right? But it's something that Jenny has begun to participate in, because you have to understand that political ideology, all these things, they are a type of spirit. Right, they are an essence of a thing, right, of a way of being, right, and so she's jacked into this thing, and so when certain things trigger that, then all of these things that she's collected, right, this rally, and then like she's really mad because her boyfriend Jim broke up with her 4 years ago, and so she says, "I hate men." Like all that stuff comes into play and begins to animate her. Does that make sense? So don't think that it's just some leather-winged dude that you can't see that's like whispering into Jenny, right? It's what's working inside of her, which she's already begun to give herself over to. This is idolatry, right? She's like, the power of my femininity and the ability to choose and da-da-da, like all these things, which are really like her worshiping herself, her worshiping her sex, her gender. You understand what I'm saying? All this idolatry moves her into this place in which she's now susceptible to be influenced by these spiritual forces which are bigger than her. In the Orthodox tradition, we call these passions. Yeah. Where you are passive to this thing. So if someone has the passion of lust, right? It's like, okay, hey, John, how you doing? Great, blah, blah, blah. John's just a normal guy. But for whatever reason, John's got a thing for like that long blonde hair and those long legs. And John, he just can't control himself. Boom. John becomes a John. You see what I'm saying? This is the way to discern this. And the reason why I think this is really important is because, like I said, if you don't believe me about like needing to change tactics on certain things, just look at what happened with January 6th. Yes. Right? That's the exact kind of trap I'm talking about. That accomplished something, but not what people thought. It was the other, you see what I'm saying? Yes. The way that you really affect change is you see yourself first. And this isn't hokey. This isn't kumbaya. This is the real deal. You got to cleanse yourself first, because then you're a free agent, right? Because what you don't understand is you're not as free as you think you are. You're influenced by these things. you got to identify them first. And then when you do that, then you can talk to Jenny and maybe pull her out of the matrix, right? And that's how this works, right? But if you don't take those steps to really see what you're dealing with, then you just become an agent on the other end and you start attacking Jenny at Thanksgiving. And then you're adding to this bigger kind of quote unquote divide of culture war, just to kind of bring us back closer to something else you were. Does that?
Yeah, but it's just so in our fallen nature, like you mentioned earlier, to do this. And again, it's just that the pendulum swinging. And it's almost like a team thing. I understand that. And I'm not trying to sound like just the libertarian that just says, oh, both sides are the same, et cetera, et cetera. But it's natural. Like if it feels like you're on the losing team for a long time, to want your team to start pounding the team that's been beating you for so long. And you live in Kansas City. I'm a Raiders fan. I'm tired of seeing the Chiefs beat us. And I can't wait till we start destroying them. That's on a fun, secular, completely entertainment level. But I think that's within us as human beings.
Forgive me. I mean, people are probably going to never want me on here again. But that's where Christ comes in. That's where orthodoxy came in for you, because it's the way out. It's the only, Christ offers us the way to like really get out of the pendulum swing in a real way. And I'm not talking Jesus when you were in your, Sunday school that told you just, people who smoke are bad people. I'm not that, just so we know that's part of the problem.
Yeah.
And I'm going to use a word which some people may or may not be familiar with. Forgive me, but stop me because I had some coffee, so I might be on a roll. But this is a term we use called antichrist.
Yes.
And I just want to tell people, when I say antichrist, don't roll your eyes and just think like, Alex Jones or like, which, God bless Alex Jones, whatever. Like, I'm not talking about Alex Jones or Jerry Falwell. What I mean by antichrist is we're talking more now about what I've been failing at probably of describing how these principalities and powers work. Don't think about some, dark-haired, guy like in a movie, Start thinking about a system that moves people. And more importantly, a system that isn't opposed to quote unquote Christ. It's a system that's being in the place of Christ.
Yep.
A system that offers you a way that makes you feel like, Jesus, blah, blah, blah. This is why on the one hand, you get people who are, Sodom and Gomorrah saying that they're Christians, right? But then on the other hand, you get Westboro Baptist people saying that they're Christians. They're both wrong. And they're both the reason why most people have rejected Christ and Christ in general, right? And so orthodoxy says like they're both wrong. This is the truth. And Christ says, follow me and like forgive me. I'm gonna scandalize some people, but Christ is this gymnast. He's this perfect. Before Bruce Lee, there was Jesus. Like this perfect way of dealing with everything. This is why when you read the Gospels, you see Christ acting. Christ is on the one hand dealing with religious leaders who had a system which was wrong, which was all about the externals, right? But not the internal of like love and like justice and mercy, all these things, right? But on the other hand, on the other side, he's also dealing with the state and with like these powers and wickedness. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Christ is always, they're trying to always pin him one way or the other, and he never goes for it. This is who we learn from. And this is where we learn to really navigate and to begin to dodge, not just dodge, because that's the thing. It's not just about spending our lives ducking and dodging. It's about accuracy, learning where to hit the joints. It's about really taking on Goliath. Because Jesus is the son of David. And David killed Goliath with accuracy. Right?
Yes, well put. I'll do this anyway. I was going to ask you, I got to respect your time so we can close. I wanted to say, I'll give you the floor and let you say anything you want on the stuff we've been talking about. You kind of ended it, beautifully there, but I'll still give you as much time as you'd like. Kind of bring us to a close, and anything on principalities and powers, any of the stuff we've talked about that you love to kind of leave people with, or something to think about, or any of this.
Yeah, thank you so much. I just want to say that, first of all, thank you for this opportunity. And I really think that we talked a little bit earlier, but I really think for you personally, don't underestimate the way that you're able to facilitate a community and facilitate connection with people. And I just want to say, God bless you for your work, Buck, and may God continue to really grow you in this sense of connecting people, because that's really what I'm trying to talk about. Is these principalities and these powers fundamentally disconnect people from each other. If you imagine a cross is a vertical beam and a horizontal beam. That vertical beam is a symbol of a person's connection with their creator, with God. That horizontal beam is the connection between a person and their fellow man. You need to have both. You need to have both in order to form a cross. And when a cross is formed, what you see is a symbol of what it means to be a hero, of what it means to be a friend, to be everything that we understand to be good and valiant and true. That's who Christ is. Christ is the embodiment of love, of truth, of goodness, of strength, of courage, of wisdom, all of these things. And when we see that embodiment, you can't be what you can't see. And so Christ becomes the means by which we see what it means to be a human, truly. A human that is not caught up in their own self-delusion of being this perfect person, or this other delusion of being nihilistic and nothing matters. The world we're living in right now is pushing us to either pole. It doesn't matter. If it can get you to be nihilistic and to give up, great. If it can get you to be enraged, become a vessel by which destruction and hatred is poured into the world, great. It doesn't matter. Because there are entities in this world and in this existence that hate you, because you're made in the image of God and because you're loved. Every single one of us are loved. But that love comes at a cost. And when we make mistakes, that's not the problem. The problem is when we choose to just stay there in the gutter, right? And that's what the world's trying to get us to do, is to be stuck one way or the other. And I'm saying to everyone, understand where this fight lies. It isn't in just corrupt governments. It's in a corrupt system on a bigger level. And these systems have been around a lot longer than our countries. This isn't just a matter of this administration.
Right.
You understand that. Don't think that the next administration, whatever that's going to be, it's going to solve other problems. But if you don't watch it, it's going to bring other ones in that could be even worse. So be awake. Really be vigilant, be watchful, and understand that it's only in the pursuit of truth that you can have the eyes to see. And truth is a person. This is what I found. And I was not always a believer. And what I'm calling everyone to understand, what I'm trying to say is, you need to find this for yourself. But I would say to you, you don't have to make it up. The path has already been laid. And it's an old path. It's a tried and true path, right? But follow that path that's been laid out. And what you'll find is a king who not only will guide you, but will lead you to a real victory. And that's not just poetic language. That's take it from someone who's been to hell and back, right? We're about to enter into a real dark time in at least this country's history, if not human history. But this is also where people are made heroes. This is where people are made saints, is in these dark hours. So hopefully what I've laid out is a path where people can get the tools to discern what's really happening and walk that tightrope.
Yeah, discernment. That's what we long for. It's tough. That's for sure. Plug anything you'd like before we get out of here. Your podcast,
sure.
Your website, any of that.
Yeah, there's the Same Area Video website. I'd appreciate anyone checking it out, especially support to the St. Elizabeth Sisterhood. We have a sisterhood here, the monastics, who sew baptismal robes. So hopefully there'll be a whole flush of people want to get baptized in the next year or so here. So please, help. It helps support the nuns, and they'll gladly, put your name in. They'll pray for you. We do daily services here. So, check out the website, check out the St. Elizabeth Sisterhood on the website. And I also have the Real Path podcast with my co-hosts Andrew and Cyprian. So check that out. This is my main thing, just trying to walk this narrow path which Christ has called us to. I think if anyone wants to kind of even, what are you talking about? There's this an author, his name's Walter Wink.
Yes.
He wrote a book called Naming the Powers, which is kind of an intro to a trilogy, which is really good. And it'll give you, it'll kind of give you a systematic walkthrough of what I'm talking about. And just so everyone's clear, besides the fact that I'm not a very bright guy, I'm not succinct, and I'm kind of crazy, I do speak in a little bit of kind of broader abstract terms because I'm trying to reach a broader audience. You know what I mean? I understand that not everybody's religious, not everyone's Orthodox, and I'm trying to speak about something that is a reality whether you believe or not. Mm-hmm. And so this book will help you kind of walk into what I'm speaking about. And then from there, I would say once you're kind of awakened, then keep following Buck, and he's got some good stuff to say. But when you're looking for those answers, I'm just going to say it. The Orthodox Church has the answers, believe it or not. So you can always contact me there too. And I try really good. I got a couple emails from people through our first one. I just want to say I work really hard if you reach out to me, you got questions, I work really hard to answer and to engage people. So if anyone wants to reach out and have a further discussion or you have questions, that's what I'm here for. That's my joy, is to help people find the light. So
excellent. Father Turbo Qualls, it's been an honor. Thank you. Again, thank you for part 2.
Thanks. Thank you, Buck. God bless you.
Yeah. Yes, sir. What a great discussion that was with Father Turbo Qualls. I hope you guys got a lot out of that. There's those conversations where you hear them on a podcast and you got to replay it once or twice. I love episodes that I find to be that way. And so I think this might be one of those episodes for you. Hope you enjoyed it. And we were talking off air and he kind of told me, when you have a platform like this and you're putting out some of the messaging that I put out into the world, especially really like this topic today, when you talk about some things like this there's a lot of depth and power and importance to this discussion. Sometimes there's some dark forces that aim their anger your way, my way, that would be. And yeah, there's definitely been some dark forces coming at me in the last week or two. So if you do pray for me. That'd be very nice. As for this show, all of my links can be found at counterflowpodcast.com. Of course, Twitter, Instagram, all of those kind of things. And hit subscribe at our YouTube page. Just go to YouTube, search Counterflow with Buck Johnson. You'll find us. You can watch this video with Father Turbo and myself, where you can watch just about all of the videos. As you loyal fans might know, a couple of them as of late were a little bit, there were some issues as just purely for the video part. I think we're about done with those issues, and this one turned out well with Father Turbo. Hit subscribe. Let's get those numbers up for the YouTube page. And we also do live streams on there that are exclusive to the YouTube page. They won't be on your podcast feed on your regular app. So there you go. As for me, I think that's about all I got, guys. We will talk to you soon. Have a good week.
You get split in fucking half, but I call him the hologram graph. But I am the center inside the placenta of math. You clash with cyanide gas and die fast. Rhythmical equivalent of solids, liquid and gas. We smash your sinus with the power of Lord Titus. But I am the virus inside of the iris of Cyrus.
Like the sound of the Counterflow podcast? Our audio production is provided by Podsworth Media. Check them out at podsworth.com.